Malia Henderson, a compassionate high school counselor, steps into the sleek headquarters of Luxontech, ready to surprise her lifelong friend, CEO Danielle Crawford. But a humiliating encounter with an arrogant junior executive leaves her shaken and humiliated, as he mistakes her for a low-level job applicant and dismisses her with a cruelty that stings. Unwilling to bring Danielle into her troubles, Malia decides to walk away, until Danielle uncovers the ugly truth. What begins as a simple catch-up becomes a whirlwind investigation into hidden discrimination, forcing Malia to face long-buried wounds and Danielle to confront the toxic culture within her own company. Together, they must challenge the injustices woven into Luxontech's foundation, standing up not only for themselves but for all those who've suffered in silence. In this gripping, emotional journey, Hidden Ties explores friendship, resilience, and the courage to demand change, even when the cost is high. Malia Henderson stepped out of her car, gazing up at the glass skyscraper towering over her, marveling at the sleek exterior of Luxontech headquarters. The building exuded a kind of austere brilliance, an emblem of the high-powered corporate world Danielle had conquered. She smiled, proud of her friend's journey from their college days to the success she had built in this world. Malia adjusted her braided hair, feeling a thrill of excitement. This was supposed to be a simple, casual drop-in to surprise Danielle. As she walked through the lobby, her gaze lingered on the polished floors, the towering ceilings, and the bustling employees. But Malia was slightly taken aback when a brisk receptionist directed her to a small waiting area. She waited, expecting Danielle to walk in any moment, her mind already picturing their reunion. "Miss Henderson?" A voice broke through her thoughts. Malia looked up to see a tall man with a slick-back blonde hairstyle, dressed in a crisp suit. His blue eyes held a distant, scrutinizing gaze. "Yes, that's me," Malia said, standing to shake his hand. "I'm Evan Cooper," he introduced himself curtly, not extending his hand in return. "You'll be interviewing with me today." Malia's eyebrows raised slightly. "Interview? I think there's been a misunderstanding," she began to explain, but he cut her off. "I'm sure it's a bit overwhelming for someone new to a corporate environment like this," Evan continued with a hint of impatience, glancing briefly at her simple, yet tasteful attire. "Let's go ahead and start." Malia's mouth went dry. She felt the weight of his dismissive attitude settle heavily on her, yet something held her back from correcting him. Perhaps it was the presumption in his eyes or maybe the slight curl of his lip as he looked her up and down, but she let it pass, deciding to let him make his own assumptions. Evan gestured toward a chair in the corner of his office, sleek and sterile with modern art hung on pale walls. As Malia sat, he pulled out a clipboard, barely glancing her way. "So, what qualifications do you bring? I mean, Luxontech sets the bar very high." Malia kept her composure, wondering at the irony of the situation. "Well, I've worked extensively in educational settings," she replied, knowing he wasn't interested in her background as a high school counselor. "Educational," he repeated, as if tasting something bitter. He let out a small, condescending laugh. "I see. Well, Luxontech is not exactly a high school. Here, we run on results, not good intentions. Are you prepared to handle that?" Malia felt her heart tighten, but she offered a calm smile. "I believe results matter anywhere you're responsible for the lives you affect." Evan frowned, as if Malia's words had challenged him. He flipped through a few more pages of her resume, or what he imagined it might look like, before looking back up, his tone souring. "Well, that's interesting. But I'd have to say, I'm not sure this is the right environment for you. Luxontech doesn't do well with inexperienced candidates." Malia stood up slowly, taking a deep breath. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Cooper." "Thank you, Ms. Henderson," he said coldly, with a dismissive nod. As she exited the office, Malia could feel the anger simmering just beneath the surface. How quickly he had dismissed her, assuming she was somehow beneath him. She walked down the stairs rather than taking the elevator, trying to collect herself. A sense of shame mingled with anger, knowing she could have clarified her purpose there but had chosen not to, allowing him to think she was there for a job. Once outside, Malia paused, looking back at the gleaming building with a bitter smile. This wasn't the reunion she had expected. She typed a quick message to Danielle, her fingers hesitating only for a second before she pressed send. "Sorry, something came up, let's meet another day." That evening, her phone rang, and Danielle's familiar voice greeted her. "Malia. I got your text. Are you okay? You seemed really excited to visit today." Malia hesitated, her mind flashing back to the interview. Part of her wanted to shrug it off, to forget the humiliation, but another part longed to confide in her friend. "Oh, it was just one of those days, Danny," Malia said, trying to keep her tone light. "I guess corporate environments aren't really my thing after all." Danielle paused on the line, picking up on the tension in Malia's voice. "Something happened, didn't it?" Malia's silence spoke volumes. "I can tell, Malia. You don't need to say it if you're not ready. But if anyone gave you trouble, I want to know." Malia forced a smile, feeling a wave of warmth at Danielle's protective tone. "Let's just say I had a memorable experience." They wrapped up their call soon after, but Danielle was left unsettled. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more behind Malia's casual tone. The next day, Danielle sat at her desk, scanning through employee reports with a frown. She had been hearing faint echoes of complaints about Evan Cooper's attitude. As she scanned through the complaints, certain phrases jumped out at her: condescending treatment, dismissive behavior, disrespectful. She leaned back in her chair, drumming her fingers on her desk. If her gut was right, Malia's memorable experience had likely been the work of this very junior executive. Danielle pulled up the company's diversity policy documents, already mapping out a course of action in her mind. Later that day, she sent a carefully crafted email to her department heads, announcing an upcoming values and diversity review for the entire company. It was a subtle move, but Danielle knew it would cause ripples. She needed the company to see, not only the problematic employee, but the culture that had allowed someone like Evan to thrive. As Malia walked through the hallways of her high school, she found herself replaying her interview with Evan. She was no stranger to bias, it had a way of sneaking into moments, even subtle ones, leaving a lingering taste of bitterness. But something about Evan's dismissiveness had struck a nerve. The way he looked at her, like she didn't belong. In her office, she leaned back, staring at the framed photos on her desk. A wave of emotions surged within her, memories surfacing of times she'd been dismissed or judged unfairly. This time, though, it wasn't just about her. She knew she could brush it off as she always had, but what about those who came after her? What about the students who would one day walk into similar spaces? A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts, and she was grateful for the distraction. Evan was staring at his screen, rereading the email from Danielle about a values and diversity review. His hand gripped the edge of his desk. Was she implying something? No one in upper management had ever taken issue with his approach before. In fact, he'd been praised for his tough love style, though he preferred to think of it as setting high standards. Yet, Danielle's message felt like a warning. Evan's brow furrowed as he thought back to Malia. He'd dismissed her so easily, assuming she was just another hopeful who'd stumbled in. He smirked, leaning back in his chair. If anyone asked, he'd simply say he was vetting her the way he did everyone else. As if on cue, his assistant, Claire, knocked and entered. "Evan, I just wanted to let you know that a few people have expressed concerns about the recent tone of your interviews." Claire's voice was hesitant, clearly nervous. Evan forced a smile. "Concerns? About my tone?" "Claire, you know that's just me pushing people to be their best." "Of course, Evan. It's just, maybe for this review, it would help to be a little softer." Evan's eyes narrowed. "Are you saying I should compromise my standards?" "No," Claire stammered, "not at all. Just, maybe listen to their perspectives more. Evan's face hardened, and Claire quickly exited, leaving him stewing in his chair. He couldn't shake the feeling that all this scrutiny was somehow connected to that woman he'd brushed off. But there was no way she'd have any real influence. After all, who was she to challenge him? Meanwhile, Danielle had begun to meet with employees, asking about their experiences in Luxemtech. Her approach was casual, inviting staff into her office for what seemed like a friendly chat. But as she listened, stories started to align, especially where Evan was concerned. One afternoon, she sat with Sophie, a junior analyst who looked visibly uncomfortable discussing her experience. Danielle leaned forward, her voice soft and encouraging. "Sophie, I'm here to make things right. I just need to understand what's going on. What's been bothering you?" Sophie took a shaky breath. "It's Evan. He has this way of making people feel small. I know he's respected, but he's dismissive, especially with some of the women on the team." Danielle's gaze didn't waver. "Did he ever make you feel that way?" Sophie nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "He told me my ideas were cute once, and then he told another analyst he needed serious people on his projects." Danielle's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice calm. "Thank you, Sophie. I'm going to take care of this." After Sophie left, Danielle sighed, leaning back in her chair. More employees had spoken of similar encounters, each story adding another layer to her growing concern. Luxemtecha's success meant nothing if it was built on the backs of mistreated employees. She made a note to reach out to Malia. Her friend's experience might just be the catalyst she needed to confront Evan directly. Back at the high school, Malia was sitting across from a student named Jordan. His face was flushed with frustration. "They said I couldn't handle the advanced math class," Jordan was saying, his eyes defiant. "Just because I struggled in one test last year. It's like they think I'm not good enough." Malia leaned forward, her heart aching for him. "Jordan, you have every right to challenge that. Don't let one person's opinion define your abilities." Jordan nodded, but Malia could see the lingering hurt in his eyes. Watching him, she was reminded of the sting of Evan's dismissiveness. If she didn't stand up now, how could she look Jordan in the eye and encourage him to fight for his place? As soon as he left her office, Malia picked up her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she dialed Danielle. "Danny," she began, her voice firm despite the emotions swirling inside her. "I think it's time I told you exactly what happened with Evan." Later that evening, Malia arrived at Danielle's home. Danielle opened the door, immediately pulling Malia into a hug. They settled into the living room, the room's warm lighting creating a safe atmosphere for the difficult conversation. "So," Danielle began, sitting across from Malia, her expression tense with concern. "Tell me everything." Malia recounted the humiliating interview in painstaking detail, the harsh words and demeaning looks Evan had used to tear down her self-worth. As she spoke, Danielle's face shifted from concern to anger, her hands clenched tightly around her mug. "He had the nerve to treat you like that?" Danielle's voice was steely. As if you didn't belong." Malia nodded, her eyes cast downward. "I've dealt with worse, Danny. But it's exhausting. Knowing that nothing's ever enough, that I have to keep proving myself. And Evan, he made me feel like I'd walked into the wrong world." Danielle's jaw tightened. "Malia, I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have to feel that way, especially not in my company. Evan's behavior stops now. I'll make sure of it." Malia looked up, surprised at the intensity in Danielle's voice. "You don't have to." "No, I do," Danielle interrupted, her gaze unwavering. "If Evan can treat you like that, then he's doing it to others too. I've already started looking into it, and I want you to know I'll be taking action. Luxemtech isn't the kind of place where people get away with this kind of behavior." Malia's eyes softened. "Thank you, Danny. I wasn't sure I'd be able to tell you. I didn't want to put you in this position. Danielle reached across the table, taking Malia's hand. You've always had my back, Malia. Now, let me have yours. Malia felt a wave of relief wash over her, the weight of her experience finally lifted. For the first time since that fateful day at Luxotech, she felt hopeful that things could change. Danielle sat in her office, hands folded on her desk as she waited for Evan to arrive. She had summoned him under the pretense of a routine check-in, but her intentions were anything but ordinary today. She planned to confront him about his behavior toward Malia, and possibly others, by subtly pushing him into revealing his own biases. The door opened, and Evan entered with his usual confidence, barely masking the hint of suspicion in his gaze. Danielle, good to see you, he said with a polite nod. Thank you for coming in, Evan. Danielle gestured to the seat across from her. I wanted to have a conversation about our work culture here at Luxotech. I'm sure you've seen the notice regarding the upcoming values review. Yes, I have, Evan replied, shifting uncomfortably. I assume everything's in order. Danielle's gaze was sharp. I wanted to get your personal take on it. How do you think we're doing with inclusivity and employee treatment? Evan blinked, caught off guard. I think we're doing quite well, actually. Our policies are solid, and I know we hire people based on merit. Danielle raised an eyebrow. And what about interpersonal conduct? How would you describe your own approach when managing or interviewing potential hires? A flicker of defensiveness crossed his face. I'm just direct, Danielle. I like to set high standards. Luxotech isn't for everyone. If someone can't handle that, it's not my problem. Danielle's expression didn't change, but her disappointment was clear. Setting standards is one thing, Evan. Making people feel dismissed or disrespected is another. Evan's posture stiffened. Danielle, I don't think that's fair. I treat everyone equally, no special treatment. Danielle let the silence linger, studying his reaction before replying. Equal treatment shouldn't come at the cost of basic respect. And if there are people who feel mistreated, it's our responsibility to address it. Consider this an opportunity to reflect. Evan nodded, his face a mask of frustration. As he left, Danielle knew her point had hit home. But she also realized that to make real change, she needed more voices. Malia's story couldn't stand alone. Malia had spent the morning carefully reaching out to other Luxotech employees she'd met through Danielle, individuals she felt might share similar experiences. Each conversation required courage, but she found that opening up about her experience encouraged others to share theirs. That afternoon, she met with Lisa, a project coordinator who had her own grievances with Evan. So he told you that your ideas were cute? Malia asked gently, leaning forward. Lisa nodded, her voice tinged with hurt. Yeah. I presented a project concept, and he actually laughed. It was like he didn't even see me as an equal. Malia's expression softened. That sounds familiar. He dismissed me in a similar way, as if I wasn't worth his time. We need to stand up to this, Lisa. If we stay quiet, he'll just keep doing it to others. Lisa looked down, nodding thoughtfully. You're right, Malia. I've been here a few years now, and I thought I could just ignore it. But if someone like you is standing up, then maybe I should too. Malia smiled, feeling a surge of confidence. Together, we'll make sure our voices are heard. Their conversation continued as more employees opened up, each story reaffirming Malia's resolve. She knew the fight ahead wouldn't be easy, but now, she didn't feel alone. Evan sat at his desk, still simmering from his meeting with Danielle when he noticed a message from Claire marked as urgent. What is it, Claire? He asked curtly as she walked in. Claire hesitated, clearly nervous. I thought you should know, that woman you interviewed last week, Malia Henderson, she's actually a friend of Ms. Crawford. Evan's face paled. What are you talking about? She never mentioned it. I don't think she wanted to, Claire said quietly. But word around the office is that they've been friends since college. Evan cursed under his breath. He had assumed Malia was just another hopeful applicant, easy to overlook. But knowing she was close to Danielle changed everything. He felt a sense of panic rise in his chest. Without another word, he rushed out of his office, desperate to find Malia and somehow smooth things over. But deep down, he knew it was likely too late. The following morning, Danielle held an all-staff meeting in one of Luxanteca's spacious conference rooms. Malia sat near the back with Lisa and a few other allies she had spoken with, all of them exchanging tense looks. Danielle's gaze swept the room, her expression resolute. "Thank you all for being here today," Danielle began. "I want to address our company values, specifically, the kind of environment we aim to create here at Luxantec. An environment where everyone, regardless of background or position, is respected." Her gaze landed briefly on Evan, who shifted uncomfortably. Malia noticed the ripple of tension his presence caused among employees nearby. "Respect isn't a privilege," Danielle continued, "it's a fundamental right. I've heard troubling feedback that some of our practices and behaviors aren't aligning with our values. Let me be clear, change is coming, and I expect each of us to reflect on how we can contribute to a culture that values and uplifts every person." The room was silent, each employee taking in Danielle's words. Some looked uneasy, but others, like Malia, felt a new sense of hope. As the meeting ended, Malia and her allies exchanged determined glances. Danielle's message had ignited something in them, a unity and purpose that hadn't been there before. After the meeting, Danielle invited Malia to her office. The two friends sat across from each other, an understanding passing between them. "You really meant what you said in there," Malia remarked, her voice filled with gratitude. Danielle nodded. "More than you know. I want everyone at Luxantec to feel safe and respected, and it's clear that's not happening. But I'll need your help to expose the full picture, Malia." Malia took a deep breath, the weight of the request settling over her. "You mean collecting evidence? Stories from others who've experienced this?" "Yes," Danielle replied firmly. "If we can document these experiences, the board will have no choice but to take action. But it has to be done carefully. I don't want you or anyone else at risk." Malia's eyes met Danielle's, her hesitation fading. "Then let's do it. I'm tired of staying silent. If sharing my story can help bring about real change here, I'm in." Danielle smiled, reaching across to squeeze Malia's hand. "Thank you, Malia. Together, we'll make sure this company lives up to the values it claims to hold." As they sat in the quiet of the office, a new resolve settled between them, a promise that neither of them would back down. They had a fight ahead of them, but for the first time, both felt prepared to face it head-on. Malia sat in a quiet coffee shop, her laptop open and a fresh notebook by her side. She had scheduled back-to-back meetings with employees from Luxantec who had reached out to her after Danielle's announcement. Their stories were harrowing yet strikingly similar, each one painting a picture of an undercurrent of bias that flowed just beneath the polished surface of the company. Lisa, the project coordinator, sat across from her, stirring her coffee with shaky hands. "I used to love coming to work," Lisa admitted softly. "But then Evan came. He's always so condescending, like none of us are worth his time." Malia nodded, jotting down notes. "And have you ever reported this to anyone?" Lisa hesitated. "I tried once. HR told me he was just direct and that I should try not to take it personally. After that, I stopped reporting things. I didn't think anyone would listen." "Well, we're listening now," Malia assured her, reaching across the table to give her a supportive smile. "Thank you, Lisa. Your voice is important, and together, we can make sure this behavior isn't ignored anymore." As Lisa left, more employees trickled in. Each person shared stories that resonated with Malia, adding to the growing pile of evidence she was collecting. By the end of the day, Her notebook was filled with first-hand accounts, fuel for the change they were determined to bring about. Evan paced in his office, his mind racing. He had heard whispers about Malia's meetings with employees, and his stomach twisted with dread. He wasn't used to feeling this vulnerable, and the threat to his position gnawed at him. He decided to take action. He picked up his phone and dialed Malia, forcing himself to keep a calm, neutral tone when she answered. "Malia, it's Evan," he said smoothly. "I wanted to reach out and, clear up any misunderstandings. I realize our first interaction might have come off the wrong way." Malia's voice was steady on the other end. "Came off the wrong way?" "Evan, that wasn't a misunderstanding. It was blatant disrespect." Evan cleared his throat, struggling to keep his composure. "Look, I'd hate for things to get out of hand. Maybe we can discuss this privately and come to an understanding." Malia's patience was running thin. "Evan, I'm documenting real issues at this company. People have experienced harm, and it's not something you can sweep under the rug. I suggest you reflect on your behavior rather than trying to manipulate your way out of it." She ended the call, leaving Evan staring at his phone, seething with frustration. Malia's words had stung more than he cared to admit, but he wasn't ready to concede defeat just yet. Later that day, Danielle sat in a board meeting, surrounded by executives with wary expressions. As she outlined her plan to address employee treatment and push for a culture overhaul, the tension in the room was palpable. One board member, Mr. Nolan, finally spoke up, his voice measured but unmistakably disapproving. "Danielle, we appreciate your dedication to this issue, but you have to understand the risk to our reputation. Luxontech has thrived under a model of efficiency and high standards." Danielle leaned forward, undeterred. "And if we want to continue thriving, we have to live up to the values we publicly champion. Ignoring this behavior doesn't just harm employees, it damages our credibility." Mr. Nolan sighed, glancing around the table at the other board members. "Consider what's at stake. Sometimes, handling things quietly is the best course of action." Danielle met his gaze, her voice firm. "Quiet solutions may save face in the short term, but they never address the problem. We have a responsibility to our people, not just our bottom line. This culture of fear and prejudice ends now." She could sense the discomfort in the room, but she held her ground. For the first time, Danielle saw that this wasn't just about Evan. It was a battle for Luxontech's soul, and she was prepared to fight for it. In the days leading up to the board meeting, Malia worked tirelessly on her statement. She wanted her words to be clear and powerful, capturing not just her experience, but the collective experiences of everyone who had been subjected to Evan's behavior. She rehearsed it over and over, her confidence wavering and building with each attempt. One evening, Danielle visited her at her high school counseling office. They sat together, Malia's statement draft in hand as she practiced in front of her friend. "And so, in closing, I urge Luxontech to consider what kind of future it wants to build," Malia read, her voice firm yet emotional. She looked up, searching Danielle's face for reassurance. Danielle smiled, her voice gentle but resolute. "It's perfect, Malia. Honest, strong, and true to who you are. Don't hold back. You're ready." Malia took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "Thank you, Danny. I just keep thinking about all the people who never had the chance to speak up. This isn't just for me, it's for them too." Danielle reached over, squeezing Malia's hand. "I know. And they'll be grateful for what you're doing." Malia nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. She was nervous, yes, but she knew this was a turning point, not just for Luxontech, but for herself as well. The day of the board meeting arrived, and Malia walked into the Luxontech boardroom with Danielle by her side. The board members sat around a long, polished table, some looking at her with curiosity, others with skepticism. Danielle stood at the front, introducing Malia. Today, Malia Henderson will be sharing her experience, along with testimonies from other employees. We're here to discuss not only her story but a systemic issue that requires our immediate attention. Malia took a deep breath and began. She shared her initial encounter with Evan, each detail chosen carefully to convey the humiliation and disrespect she had felt. As she spoke, she glanced around the room, noting the varied reactions on the board members' faces. Some looked away uncomfortably, while others leaned forward, listening intently. "And I am not alone," Malia continued, her voice unwavering. "Many employees have faced similar experiences of discrimination and disrespect, all of which go against the values Luxotech claims to uphold." She took out her notebook, reading from several testimonies. Each account painted a picture of a toxic culture that had been allowed to thrive unchecked. By the time she finished, the room was silent. Mr. Nolan, visibly uneasy, finally spoke. "Ms. Henderson, thank you for sharing. But you must understand, corporate environments are often high pressure. Some level of friction is expected." Malia held his gaze, her voice calm but unyielding. "Friction is one thing, Mr. Nolan. Systemic bias and mistreatment are another. Ignoring this issue only enables it to continue." Danielle stood by Malia's side, her face resolute. "We cannot move forward until we address what's holding us back. Luxotech can't claim to be an inclusive company if we're not willing to make changes when we see injustice." The board members exchanged looks, their expressions a mixture of tension and resignation. After a long pause, Mr. Nolan nodded slowly. "Very well. Let's discuss a plan of action." Malia and Danielle exchanged a glance, a silent affirmation of their shared victory. The meeting continued, the board's initial reluctance slowly giving way to acceptance. For the first time, Luxotech's leadership was forced to face its flaws. As the meeting concluded, Danielle placed a hand on Malia's shoulder. "We did it. Your voice made this happen." Malia smiled, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. "No, Danny. Our voices did." They left the boardroom together, knowing this was only the beginning of the work that lay ahead. But for the first time, Malia felt a sense of peace. She had found her voice, and with it, the courage to demand change. Evan sat in his office, drumming his fingers on the desk as he scanned the email from HR again. It was official, he was under investigation, and his role was temporarily suspended. The notice was chillingly impersonal, a standard letter informing him of the company's decision pending further review. He felt his face grow hot, a mix of anger and humiliation churning inside him. He knew Malia was behind this, her and her complaints, dragging his name through the mud. He gritted his teeth, hardly believing his downfall had come from someone he deemed irrelevant. His assistant, Claire, knocked tentatively on the door before stepping inside. "Evan, they need you in the conference room." "Do they?" he snapped, though he could see Claire's discomfort. She nodded without a word, and he followed her, his mind racing. This wasn't the end, not if he had anything to say about it. Malia sat in her counseling office, feeling a quiet unease settle over her. The satisfaction she'd felt after the board meeting had been short-lived. Word had spread quickly among Luxotech employees, and while some rallied behind her, others had turned cold. She'd heard whispers questioning her intentions, and a few employees had even suggested she was exaggerating for attention. Just as she was about to turn back to her work, her phone rang. It was Lisa. "Malia, I'm sorry to bother you. I just thought you should know, there are rumors going around. Some people are saying you're just out for Danielle's favor, that you're using this to get attention." Lisa's voice was hesitant, but Malia could hear the worry behind it. Malia sighed, trying to keep her tone steady. "Thanks for letting me know, Lisa. I figured there might be backlash, but I wasn't expecting it so soon." "It's not everyone," Lisa assured her quickly. "Many of us are inspired by what you did, Malia. You have allies here, I promise." "Thank you, Lisa," Malia said, a small smile breaking through her disappointment. "It means a lot to know I'm not alone in this." As she hung up, she resolved to stay strong. She had come too far to let a few doubters derail the change she was fighting for. At Luxontech headquarters, Danielle was in a tense meeting with a few key board members, including Mr. Nolan. The pressure to let the matter quietly fade away was mounting, and the board's concerns over the company's image had reached a fever pitch. "Danielle," Mr. Nolan began, his tone more forceful than usual, "we need to consider the company's future here. Going forward with a public statement about internal issues could jeopardize our standing." Danielle kept her face neutral, though frustration simmered beneath her calm exterior. "I understand your concerns, Mr. Nolan, but it's our responsibility to be transparent. If we're serious about changing Luxontech's culture, we have to start by acknowledging our mistakes." Another board member, Ms. Reeves, leaned forward. "Danielle, we all agree the culture needs improvement. But a public statement risks exposing us to liabilities. Are you willing to take that risk?" "Yes," Danielle said firmly. "I am. Because this company means more to me than profits or reputation. It's about people. If we can't protect and respect our employees, then we don't deserve their loyalty." The room fell silent, her words settling over them. Mr. Nolan looked ready to argue further, but Ms. Reeves held up a hand. "I support Danielle's decision. Our brand has thrived because of her vision. I trust her to see this through." Relieved, Danielle nodded her thanks, feeling a surge of support from Ms. Reeves. She had made her decision, and she was ready to stand by it, no matter the cost. 2 days later, Danielle stood at a podium in the Luxontech lobby, facing a crowd of employees, reporters, and onlookers. Malia stood nearby, her presence a source of strength for Danielle as she prepared to address the company. Danielle took a deep breath, her gaze steady as she began. "Today, Luxontech is taking a step toward a better future. Over the past few weeks, we have confronted issues within our organization that go against the values we stand for. These issues were brought to our attention by brave employees who were willing to speak out. And today, I want to publicly recognize one of them, Malia Henderson." Malia looked down, feeling a mix of pride and humility as Danielle continued. "Malia's courage has been instrumental in helping us recognize areas that need improvement. Luxontech will be implementing new policies to ensure fair treatment for all employees and to foster a more inclusive environment. This is just the beginning, and I pledge to make accountability a cornerstone of our culture moving forward." Danielle's words hung in the air, and after a pause, applause broke out among the crowd. While some clapped tentatively, others seemed genuinely moved, their expressions a mix of relief and encouragement. Malia felt a sense of validation, knowing her efforts were starting to bear fruit. As Danielle stepped down from the podium, Malia joined her, a quiet smile of gratitude on her face. "Thank you, Danny," she whispered. Danielle nodded, giving her a reassuring squeeze on the arm. "Thank you, Malia. I couldn't have done this without you." Meanwhile, Evan was at his breaking point. With his reputation tarnished and his suspension in place, he felt the walls closing in. But he wasn't ready to give up so easily. Desperate, he decided to turn the tables, planning to release false information about Malia in a last-ditch effort to protect himself. Late that evening, he contacted a tabloid journalist and provided them with a fabricated story, one that suggested Malia had been strategically placed by Danielle to help boost her image and strengthen her role as CEO. He watched with satisfaction as the article circulated online, knowing it would stir up suspicion and create doubt about Malia's motivations. The next morning, Malia's phone buzzed with notifications. She stared at the headline in disbelief, her heart sinking as she read the malicious story Evan had fed to the media. Danielle called her immediately. "Malia, are you okay? I saw the article." Malia took a steadying breath. "I should have expected this from him. He's grasping at straws." "Well, we're not letting him get away with this," Danielle said firmly. "We'll release a statement countering these lies. Trust me, his attempt at revenge will backfire." And backfire it did. Danielle quickly organized a press briefing, addressing the article's claims and presenting evidence that discredited Evan's accusations. By the end of the day, the backlash had turned on Evan himself, painting him as a vindictive employee unwilling to accept responsibility for his actions. With his last attempt at manipulation exposed, Evan's downfall was complete. Luxotteca's board terminated his employment, citing gross misconduct and abuse of authority. News of his dismissal spread throughout the company, and the atmosphere at Luxotteca shifted, a mixture of relief and renewed hope for a fresh start. Malia and Danielle sat together at their favorite coffee shop later that evening, reflecting on the journey they had just endured. "It feels strange," Malia admitted, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "I never expected things to go this far." Danielle smiled softly. "You were the spark we needed. Because of you, we've made real change. Luxotteca is better because of your courage, Malia." Malia chuckled, shaking her head. "Well, I had a pretty amazing CEO backing me up." They shared a laugh, the tension of the past few weeks melting away. In that moment, both women felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that together, they had transformed a company, and perhaps even each other. Malia walked slowly through the halls of Luxotteca one last time, stopping to take in the sleek offices and the lively buzz of employees working in an atmosphere that now felt lighter, freer. She felt a strange mix of pride and nostalgia as she remembered the journey that had brought her here. Danielle had urged her to consider a role within the company, but today was simply about closure. Danielle spotted her from down the hallway and waved her over, a warm smile on her face. "Malia," Danielle said as they hugged. "It's good to see you here. How are you feeling?" Malia smiled, looking around thoughtfully. "Honestly? Relieved. I wasn't sure what to expect after everything, but seeing the changes you've made, it feels good to know it was worth it." Danielle nodded. "I couldn't have done it without you. You made me see my company, and myself, more clearly than ever." They walked together toward the lobby, exchanging memories and laughs. Malia felt a profound sense of closure settle over her, knowing she'd made a lasting impact. A few weeks later, Danielle stood before a packed conference room filled with department heads, managers, and team leads. The presentation displayed on the screen highlighted Luxotteca's new inclusivity and respect initiatives, the product of her promise to make real change. "Thank you all for coming," Danielle began, her voice strong yet compassionate. "Today marks the beginning of a new era at Luxotteca. Our priority is not just innovation and efficiency, but also a commitment to our employees' well-being and to fostering a workplace where every voice is respected." Danielle's words were met with nods and murmurs of agreement. She outlined the new policies, expanded HR resources, mandatory training on unconscious bias, and an anonymous reporting system. "This isn't just a one-time overhaul," she continued, looking around the room. "It's an ongoing commitment. We'll conduct quarterly evaluations, gather feedback, and continuously improve. We want everyone here to feel valued and empowered." When she finished, the room broke into applause. Danielle felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Luxotteca was finally aligned with the values she had always dreamed of instilling. Across town, Evan sat alone in his apartment, staring at the news article about his dismissal from Luxotteca. The fallout had been swift, and he was still grappling with the fact that his career, and reputation, were in shambles. He'd always believed he was untouchable, that his talent and connections could carry him through any controversy. But in the solitude of his apartment, he was forced to confront his own actions. He saw, for the first time, the trail of hurt and resentment he'd left behind. Grabbing his phone, he considered reaching out to Malia, but he hesitated, knowing it was too late for apologies. Still, he typed out a message, "I'm sorry for everything." He hovered over the send button, uncertain. After a long pause, he deleted the message and set down his phone. It was time for him to start over, alone. A few days later, Malia and Danielle met at the cozy, familiar coffee shop where they had spent countless hours during their college years. The smell of roasted coffee beans and the soft murmur of conversation filled the air, bringing a sense of nostalgia. To new beginnings, Danielle toasted, holding up her mug with a smile. To new beginnings, Malia echoed, clinking her mug against Danielle's. They both took a sip, savoring the moment. So, Danielle began with a mischievous grin, have you given any more thought to the role here at Luxontech? The team's practically begging for you to join us. Malia chuckled. You know, I have thought about it. And while the idea of working with you is tempting, I think my heart still belongs with my students. They need someone who understands their challenges, who can encourage them to find their voices just like I did. Danielle nodded, understanding. I figured you might say that. But just know, there will always be a place for you at Luxontech if you ever change your mind. Malia smiled warmly. Thank you, Danny. That means a lot. They sat in companionable silence for a while, both reflecting on how far they had come. Luxontech had transformed, but so had they. Their friendship, tested by challenges, was stronger than ever. A week later, Malia was back at the high school, organizing her office after a busy day with students. She smiled as she straightened the framed photos of her students, each one a reminder of the lives she impacted. A soft knock sounded at the door, and Jordan, one of her students, stepped in. Hey, Ms. Henderson, he greeted, looking both excited and nervous. I just wanted to tell you. I got into that advanced math class. They reconsidered my application. Malia's eyes lit up. Jordan. That's amazing. I knew you could do it. Yeah, I couldn't have done it without your help, Ms. Henderson. You made me believe I could stand up for myself. Malia felt a surge of pride, knowing she had helped Jordan find his voice. I'm so proud of you, Jordan. Remember, you're capable of anything you set your mind to. As Jordan left, Malia sat back, feeling a deep sense of purpose. She had chosen the right path, her role here mattered, and she was exactly where she needed to be. Her experience at Luxontech had given her the courage to stand up not only for herself but also for others. And now, she was ready to pass that courage on to her students. Her phone buzzed with a message from Danielle, how about a coffee next week? First round's on me. Malia smiled, typing a quick reply, you're on. Looking forward to it. As she put her phone down, she realized that her journey was far from over. But now, she had the confidence to face whatever came next, knowing that she had made a lasting impact, not just at Luxontech, but in her own life as well. And with that, she closed her office door, ready to embrace the new beginning she had worked so hard to create.